My name is Michael Brennan. I am 47 years old and have been a neurosurgeon for 23 years. I work at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, where I coordinate the neurological trauma team. I have operated on hundreds of brains. I have literally held human lives in my hands. And in all these years, I have never believed in miracles. I believe in science, in technique, in training, in the years of residency that taught me to stay calm when the heart monitor screams, when blood obscures my field of view, when every second can mean the difference between life and permanent death. But what happened in the early hours of September 8, 2024, challenged everything I believed to be true. It was 3:12 in the morning when the emergency trauma paged me. Car accident on Massachusetts Avenue, head-on collision. A 34-year-old man with severe head trauma, a massive epidural hematoma. Window of survival. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe less. I arrived at the emergency room in 7 minutes. I saw the patient for the first time under the harsh, unforgiving lights of the trauma bay. Thomas Garrett, history professor. Light brown hair matted with dried blood, face as pale as marble. On his left wrist, a simple tattoo, a cross. The paramedics said he was conscious at the scene of the accident, that he was repeating a prayer, that he asked them to tell his wife he loved her. Then he lost consciousness. There was no time for a detailed MRI. The CT scan showed enough. Active bleeding pressing on the temporal lobe. Intracranial pressure rising, pupils beginning to dilate asymmetrically. "He has minutes, Dr. Brennan," said Dr. Rebecca Stone, a tall woman with red hair and an always focused gaze, our senior anesthesiologist. Her voice was calm, but her eyes told me what she wasn't saying. This man was dying. "Get the OR ready, now," I ordered. The team moved like a well-oiled machine. Jennifer Hayes, the scrub nurse, only 29 but with incredibly precise hands, was already preparing the instruments. Aaron Mitchell, my fourth-year resident, a tall young man with thin glasses and a brilliant mind, was reviewing the CT images for the third time. As I scrubbed in, I glanced through the window of the prep room. Thomas's wife had just arrived. She was carrying a small girl, still in her pajamas, in her arms. 3 years old, maybe 4. The woman's eyes met mine through the glass. I didn't have to say anything. She knew. I entered the operating room at 3:36 in the morning. The air was cold, sterile, with that characteristic smell of povidone iodine and anesthetic gases. Thomas was already positioned, his head fixed in the Mayfield clamp, shaved and prepped. "Oxygen saturation?" I asked. 91% and falling," Rebecca answered, adjusting the mechanical ventilator. "Intracranial pressure? 32 mmHg rising. Normal is up to 15. Above 20, irreversible damage begins." I took the scalpel from Jennifer's hands. The young nurse looked at me for a second, and I saw something strange in her eyes. It wasn't fear, it was expectation, as if she knew this night would be different. I made the initial incision. Blood. There is always blood. The craniotomy began at 3:42 in the morning, 6 precious minutes since the initial incision. Every movement had to be perfect. There was no room for error. "Cranial drill," I requested, holding out my hand. Jennifer placed the instrument in my palm with her usual precision. The sound of the drill penetrating the cranial bone is something that never gets easier to hear. A sharp, piercing sound that echoes through the room and through your bones. Some new residents faint the first time. Aaron was focused, watching my every move with absolute attention. I made 4 strategic burr holes. The bone was thinner than expected. The trauma had caused microfractures. I had to adjust the pressure. Steady hands, controlled breathing. 23 years of experience guiding every movement. "Saturation?" I asked, without taking my eyes off the surgical field. 88%, Rebecca replied. Her voice had that forced calm that doctors develop when things are getting worse. "Intracranial pressure at 36. Shit. Mannitol, now." "Already administered 3 minutes ago, Dr. Brennan. He's not responding." I removed the bone flap with extreme care. The dura mater was tense, bluish, about to rupture from the pressure of the accumulated blood. I could see the hematoma pulsating just beneath the membrane. "Giggly saw," I ordered. Young Aaron passed the saw. a wire of steel with tiny teeth used to cut bone with precision. My favorite technique for emergency craniotomies. I connected the burr holes, working quickly, but with absolute control. The bone flap came off, exposing the swollen dura mater. Surgical microscope, I requested. The lights adjusted. The Zeiss microscope descended over the operative field. 12 times magnification. Now I could see every vessel, every fiber, every millimeter of tissue. I made a careful incision in the dura mater. Dark blood gushed out immediately. Venous blood, thick, under high pressure. Jennifer had the suction ready. The field cleared in seconds. And then I saw the hematoma. It was worse than the images showed. Much worse. The bleeding had spread across the surface of the temporal lobe, compressing vital structures. The middle meningeal artery was ruptured. That's where the active bleeding was coming from. I need to clip the artery. Jennifer, vascular clips. The nurse already had the clips ready. Her movements were fast, efficient, but I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. It was the first time I had ever seen that in her. I began to remove the clot. Delicate work. Thomas's brain was swollen, visually pulsating with each heartbeat. Every touch had to be gentle. Brains don't forgive brute force. Saturation dropping to 83, Rebecca announced. Now there was clear tension in her voice. Heart rate 52, severe bradycardia. The monitor began to beat more urgently. The rhythm changed. Something was wrong. He's herniating, Aaron said, his voice thin with tension. The resident was right. The brain was being forced downward, compressing the brainstem. If I didn't relieve the pressure in the next few minutes, Thomas would die on the table. More suction, I ordered, my voice firmer than I felt. I continued removing the clot. My fingers worked on autopilot, years of training taking over, but my mind was racing. The pressure wasn't subsiding fast enough. The brain continued to swell. And then something happened that I didn't expect. The heart monitor emitted a long, continuous tone. A systole. Thomas's heart had stopped. Start CPR, Rebecca yelled, already moving. No, I said, my voice sharp. We can't do compressions with the skull open. It'll destroy the brain. The silence that followed was suffocating. Everyone in the room knew what this meant. Without CPR, there was no chance of reversing the cardiac arrest. With CPR, the brain would be destroyed by the compressions. Thomas Garrett was dying, and there was nothing I could do. That's when I heard Jennifer whisper something. So low I almost didn't hear it. She was praying. Atropine, 1 milligram, I ordered, keeping my voice steady even as I felt panic wanting to rise in my throat. Epinephrine, 1 milligram, now. Rebecca was already administering the drugs. Her fingers moved with impressive speed and precision. The woman had seen hundreds of emergencies, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, in the way her lips were pressed into a thin line. The monitor continued its continuous, deadly sound. Flatline. No heartbeat. Nothing, Rebecca announced after 10 endless seconds. No response. I looked at Thomas's exposed brain. There was still active bleeding. The meningeal artery needed to be clipped. But what good was a non-bleeding brain if the heart wasn't beating to pump blood to it? Second dose of epinephrine, I said, my mind calculating probabilities, protocols, trying to find a way out that didn't exist. Aaron was pale beside me. The young resident was holding the retractor so tightly that his knuckles were white. I saw him swallow hard, saw his eyes move from the monitor to me, searching for some sign that I knew what to do. I didn't. Jennifer kept whispering. Now I could make out the words. It was the Lord's Prayer. The young nurse's voice trembled, but she didn't stop. Her eyes were fixed on Thomas's face, on his closed eyelids, on the skin that was already beginning to take on that grayish hue of death. Dr. Brennan, Rebecca said, and there was something different in her voice now, something I had never heard before. It's been 2 minutes, no cardiac activity. With the brain exposed and the severe trauma, she didn't have to finish. We all knew, even if we reversed the arrest now, the brain damage from the lack of oxygen would be massive. Thomas wouldn't come back, not as he was. 30 more seconds, I said. I don't know why I chose that number. Maybe because I needed something concrete to hold on to. Then I'll call it. Call it, the polite medical term for declaring time of death. The silence in the room was suffocating. Only the continuous tone of the asystole monitor, the soft hiss of the mechanical ventilator still forcing air into Thomas's lungs, and the low voice of Jennifer praying. I looked at my hands that had saved so many lives. Trained, certified, experienced hands, completely useless now. And then, I don't know what made me do it, but I closed my eyes for a second. Just 1 second. And for the first time in decades, since I was a child and my grandmother took me to church every Sunday, I prayed. It wasn't an elaborate prayer. It wasn't theology or liturgy. It was just a desperate, silent thought, cast out to the universe or to God, or to whoever was listening. Please. Not this one, not now. He has a daughter, please. I opened my eyes. 15 seconds. Dr. Brennan, Rebecca started. I know, I interrupted. 10 seconds. Jennifer had stopped praying. Her tears were falling behind her surgical mask. I could see her wet cheeks, see the reflection of the lights in the drops that ran down her young face. 5 seconds. I took a deep breath. I prepared myself to speak the words I hated most in my entire career. Time of death, 3:50. Beep. A single sound. Faint, but unmistakable. Beep. Another one. My eyes flew to the heart monitor. The flat line had been broken. A small spike, then another. Beep. 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 He's coming back, Aaron whispered, his voice full of disbelief. My God, he's coming back. Heart rate 45, 50, Rebecca narrated, her professional voice returning but with a note of astonishment she couldn't hide. Sinus rhythm. Blood pressure 60/40 rising 70/45. Oxygen saturation 86, 89, 92%. The brain in front of me, which moments ago looked grey and lifeless, now had a pinkish color returning. I could see the pulsation returning to the superficial blood vessels. Jennifer let out a sob of relief. Aaron was gaping, looking from the patient to the monitor, as if he couldn't process what he was seeing. Impossible, the young resident murmured. A systole for 2.5 minutes, no CPR, this is impossible. But it was happening. And then I felt something that made every hair on my body stand on end. A presence behind me, as if someone had just entered the room. I turned my head instinctively, checking who had come into the operating room, but there was no one. The door remained closed. The room was sealed, as always during neurological procedures. Just the 4 team members, no one else. Still, the feeling persisted. A warm, comforting presence just over my right shoulder. Not threatening, not scary, just there. I shook my head. Focus. Thomas was stable, but the surgery wasn't over. The bleeding was still going on. The meningeal artery still needed to be clipped. Let's continue, I said, my voice coming out hoarser than I intended. Jennifer, vascular clips. The young nurse blinked, as if waking from a trance, and quickly handed me the clips. Her eyes met mine for a moment, and I saw something in them. She had felt it too, I was sure of it. I turned my attention back to the surgical field. I located the source of the bleeding, the middle meningeal artery, ruptured near its bifurcation. The blood pulsed with each heartbeat, now regular and strong. I positioned the first clip, steady hands, controlled breathing. I closed the clip. The bleeding stopped immediately in the proximal portion. Second clip, I requested. Jennifer placed it in my hand. And that's when it happened. I felt another hand cover mine. It was not my imagination. It was not a hallucination caused by exhaustion or stress. It was real, physical, tangible. A warm hand, larger than mine, enveloped my right hand with a gentleness impossible to describe. It didn't press, it didn't force, it just guided. My heart pounded. My breath caught in my throat. But strangely, I didn't feel fear. I felt calm. A deep, absolute calm that seemed to flow from that invisible hand directly into me. The hand guided mine toward a specific point in the brain tissue, a point I hadn't noticed before. A small perforating vessel, hidden under a fold of the temporal cortex, bleeding discreetly. If I didn't seal it, It would cause a secondary hematoma in the coming hours. Thomas would survive the surgery, only to die 2 days later. I placed the clip exactly where the hand guided me. Perfect. The hand led me to another point. A microscopic fragment of bone, invisible to the naked eye, embedded in the cortex. If it remained there, it would cause an epileptic focus, seizures for the rest of Thomas's life. With forceps, I removed the fragment. The hand was still there, warm, present, guiding my every move with a precision that surpassed my own skill. I was operating at my maximum technical capacity, but there was something more, something impossible to explain with science or training. "Dr. Brennan," Aaron's voice brought me partially back. Are you all right?" I realized I must have been standing still, looking at my own hands as if I didn't recognize them. "I am," I replied automatically. "Keep monitoring the vitals." I went back to work. The invisible hand remained with me. It guided me through every step of the surgery with a perfection I had never experienced. Irrigation, hemostasis, checking adjacent vessels. Each movement flowed into the next like a perfectly choreographed dance. I removed the last of the clots. Thomas's brain now had a healthy color, pulsating rhythmically. The intracranial pressure had normalized. The vessels were intact. There was no more bleeding. The surgery, which should have taken at least 4 hours given the complexity and complications, had taken exactly 57 minutes from the initial incision. "Intracranial pressure?" I asked. 14 mmHg, Rebecca replied, and there was undisguised admiration in her voice. "Completely normal. Saturation 98%, heart rate 62, blood pressure 120/80. Dr. Brennan, he's perfect. It was impossible. Patients with trauma like Thomas's don't become perfect. Not after a systole. Not after an intracranial pressure of 36. Not after imminent brain herniation." But the numbers didn't lie. "I'm starting the closure," I announced. It was only when I reached for the dura mater to begin suturing it that the presence vanished, suddenly, completely, as if it had never been there. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. In 23 years of surgery, my hands had never shaken. "Jennifer," I said without looking at the nurse, "did you feel something different during the surgery?" The silence that followed was too long. Then, in a very low voice, almost inaudible, she replied, "Yes, doctor, I did." I finished suturing the dura mater in silence. My movements were mechanical, automatic, but my mind was elsewhere, processing, questioning, trying to find a rational explanation for what had just happened. There was none. "Aaron, reposition the bone flap," I instructed. The young resident moved to help, but his hands were also trembling slightly. I saw him look at Jennifer across the room, a silent exchange of glances heavy with meaning. They knew too. We all knew. Something impossible had happened in that room. We fixed the flap with titanium plates and screws. Standard procedure. I sutured the periosteum, the gallia aponeurotica, the subcutaneous tissue, layer by layer, returning to the physical, tangible world where things made sense. But my hands still remembered. They still felt the warmth of that other hand, still felt the gentleness with which it had guided every movement. "Closure complete," I announced at 5:16 in the morning. "Rebecca, you can start tapering the sedation." The anesthesiologist nodded, her fingers already adjusting the infusion pumps. But she said nothing. Her face was pale, her expression distant. Throughout the entire surgery, after Thomas came back from a systole, she hadn't taken her eyes off the patient, as if she were witnessing something sacred. We removed the surgical drapes. Thomas's head was bandaged, a clean white dressing covering the incision. His vital signs remained stable, perfect in fact, as if the trauma had never happened. "Let's take him to the ICU," I said. "Intensive neurological monitoring. Control CT in 6 hours. I want to be notified immediately of any change." "Yes, doctor," Jennifer replied, but her voice was different, softer, reverent. As the team prepared Thomas for transport, I left the operating room. I tore off my gloves with more force than necessary, threw them in the medical waste bin. I took off my gown, cap, mask, as if by removing the physical barriers I could also remove the memory of what I had felt. It didn't work. I went straight to the doctor's lounge. I turned on the faucet and let the cold water run over my hands for long minutes. I watched the water fall clear and normal over my skin, ordinary hands, hands that had felt something impossible. I looked in the mirror. The man staring back at me seemed to have aged 10 years in 2 hours. Deep dark circles, messy graying hair, eyes too wide with a glint I didn't recognize, fear, awe, confusion, all of the above. Michael. I turned abruptly. Rebecca was at the door, still in her surgical gown. She had taken off her mask, and I could see she was crying. Silent tears streaming down her normally composed face. "Rebecca, what—" "I saw it," she interrupted me, her voice trembling. "When you were positioning the second clip. I was facing you. I saw your hand move in a way that wasn't you moving it. It was like—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "It was as if someone was guiding you." My heart pounded. "You saw it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Not with my eyes," Rebecca said, moving closer. She leaned against the sink next to me as if she needed support. "But I felt it. We all felt it. There was someone else in that room, Michael, someone who shouldn't have been there." "That's impossible," I said, but the words sounded hollow even to me. "I know," she agreed. "I know it's impossible, but it happened. And that man—" She gestured in the direction of the ICU. "That man should be dead. A systole for 2.5 minutes without CPR. Brain herniation. Critical intracranial pressure. Michael, you know better than anyone. There's no recovery from that. It doesn't exist." "But he's stable," I said, more to myself than to her. "He's perfect," Rebecca corrected, her voice full of awe and fear. "All vital signs normal pupillary reflexes. It makes no sense. Unless—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Unless it was a miracle. The word hung between us, unsaid, but absolutely present. "Where are Jennifer and Aaron?" I asked. "In the ICU, helping to position Thomas. But Jennifer was—" Rebecca hesitated. "She was praying again. Out loud this time. And Aaron didn't try to stop her. Aaron Mitchell, the most skeptical resident I knew, the young man who argued against faith and spirituality in every hallway discussion, if even he wasn't arguing. "We need to talk about this," Rebecca said. "All of us, the team, because what happened in there is going to get out. You know how hospitals are, and when it does, when it gets out, it will be chaos," I finished. She nodded. What neither of us said, but both of us thought, was, "And what if it happens again?" I spent the next 2 hours in my office staring at the wall. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I couldn't read reports. I couldn't review scans. My mind kept going back to that moment, that hand, that impossible warmth. At 7:20 in the morning, my phone rang. It was the ICU. "Dr. Brennan, this is head nurse Davidson. The patient, Thomas Garrett, is waking up." My heart pounded. So soon? Patients with severe head trauma usually take days to emerge from sedation, sometimes weeks. And when they do wake up, they rarely wake up whole. "I'm on my way," I said, already getting up. I ran through the hospital corridors. It was 7:30 on a normal Monday morning. The hospital was starting to wake up. Doctors arriving for their shifts, nurses changing shifts, the smell of strong coffee coming from the cafeteria. Everything absolutely normal. Except nothing was normal. I reached the ICU in 3 minutes. Jennifer was still there, even though her shift had ended an hour ago. The young nurse was sitting outside Thomas's room, her eyes closed. Praying again, I realized. "Jennifer," I called softly. She opened her eyes. They were red with fatigue, but there was something else. A light, a quiet certainty I had never seen in her before. "He's waking up, Dr. Brennan," she said, her voice full of awe. "And he's talking." I entered the room. Thomas was in bed, the mechanical ventilator still connected, but on minimal support. His eyes were open, focused, alert, completely different from the vacant stare that neurological patients often have. When he saw me, he tried to smile around the endotracheal tube. "Thomas," I said, approaching him. "Do you know where you are? Do you know your name?" He nodded, his eyes clear and understanding. I took out my penlight. I tested his pupillary reflexes. Normal. I asked him to squeeze my hands, equal strength bilaterally, to follow my finger with his eyes. Perfect eye movements. Impossible. I'm going to remove the tube, I announced to Nurse Davidson, an experienced woman in her 50s. Prep for emergency suction. I carefully removed the endotracheal tube. Thomas coughed a few times, then took a deep breath. The first spontaneous breath. His lungs worked perfectly. "How do you feel?" I asked. Thomas looked at me. His brown eyes were moist. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse but clear. "I saw you." A shiver ran down my spine. "You saw me." "During the surgery," Thomas said, each word coming out with effort but with determination. "I was floating above the table. I saw everything. I saw when my heart stopped. I saw you praying." My mouth went dry. I hadn't prayed out loud. It had been a silent, private, desperate thought. "Thomas, you were sedated." "I saw Jennifer praying," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. The man turned his eyes slightly, finding the nurse who had entered behind me. "Thank you. Your prayer was heard." Jennifer let out a sob. She covered her mouth with her hands. "And I saw him," Thomas said, turning his eyes back to me. "The man who was with you, the man who guided your hands." The world seemed to stop. "What man?" I managed to ask, though I already knew the answer. "Tall, dark hair, wearing something white, shining. He was right behind you, Doctor. He placed his hands over yours." Thomas smiled, a weak but genuine smile. "He told me it wasn't my time yet. That my daughter still needed me. That my wife still had a whole life ahead with me." My legs grew weak. I sat in the chair next to the bed before they gave out. "You didn't see that," I said, but my voice had no conviction. "You were unconscious. Cardiac arrest, no brain activity." "I know what I saw, Dr. Brennan," Thomas said, and there was an absolute peace in his voice. "And you know it too, because you felt him. You felt his hands on yours." How could he know? How could he know with such precision? "I didn't," I started, but I couldn't finish. Thomas extended his weak hand toward me. Instinctively, I took it. His skin was warm, alive, pulsing with a life that shouldn't exist. "Thank you for saving me," he said. "But we both know you didn't do it alone." The door to the room opened abruptly. It was Aaron, still in his scrubs from the night shift. The young resident was out of breath, as if he had been running. "Dr. Brennan, you need to come now." "What happened?" "It's Thomas's wife, and other family members of ICU patients. They're in the hallway and—" Aaron hesitated, looking from Thomas back to me. "They're saying they saw a light coming from this wing. During the night, a bright white light that came from the direction of the operating room. I left the room in a state of shock. The ICU hallway was filled with people, more than should have been allowed. Patients' families, some nurses, 2 hospital security guards looking confused at the small crowd. And at the center of it all was a young woman holding a little girl, Thomas's wife. Sarah Garrett, I read on the visitor's badge she wore. Messy brown hair, eyes swollen from crying, but there was something else in her face now. Hope and certainty. "Dr. Brennan," she called to me, approaching. The little girl in her arms, Thomas's daughter, had huge, curious eyes. "Yes?" "I know this is going to sound insane," Sarah began, her voice trembling. "But I have to tell you, I was in the hospital chapel around 4 in the morning, praying, begging. And then I felt it. I felt that Thomas was going to be okay. An absolute peace washed over me. And when I came back to the ICU hallway, I saw it." "Saw what?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "A light," she said, "coming from that direction." She pointed exactly where the neurosurgery OR was located. A white, bright light, but it didn't hurt my eyes. It only lasted a few seconds, but I know what I saw. "I saw it too," said a voice behind her. An elderly man, maybe 70. "My son is in the ICU. Motorcycle accident. I've been here for 3 days. I was dozing in that chair when the light woke me up. I thought it was lightning, but there was no thunder, and it was coming from inside the hospital." "We saw it too," said a younger woman, holding another woman's hand. "We were outside smoking. I know it's not allowed, but we were desperate. And we saw the light through that window. She pointed to the hallway window that looked out onto the surgical wing. I looked at Aaron. The young resident was pale, his eyes wide behind his thin-framed glasses. "Dr. Brennan," he said quietly, for my ears only. "That's 7 people, 7 independent witnesses, all saying the same thing, same time, same direction, same description of the light." "There has to be an explanation," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. "An electrical surge, a reflection from car headlights, something." "At 4 in the morning?" Aaron questioned. "From the sealed operating room with no external windows?" "Dr. Brennan, you know that doesn't make sense." He was right. It made no sense at all. "Doctor," Sarah called to me again, touching my arm gently. "How is my husband? Please, I need to know." I took a deep breath. I switched back to doctor mode, to the familiar territory of clinical facts and data. "He's awake," I said, and I saw her face light up. "He's talking. His neurological signs are excellent, better than any prognosis I could have possibly given." Sarah started to cry, not from sadness, from pure, absolute relief. The little girl in her arms started asking, "Mommy, Mommy?" confused by the tears, used by, "Can I see him?" Sarah asked. "Yes, come with me." I guided Sarah and her daughter to the room. When the door opened and the girl saw her father, she cried out, "Daddy!" with so much joy my heart ached. Thomas opened his arms, weak but present, and the girl practically leaped from her mother to her father. Sarah joined them, the 3 of them embracing, crying and laughing at the same time. I stepped out of the room to give them privacy. In the hallway, Jennifer was still there. She had witnessed everything. Tears were streaming freely down her young face. "It's a miracle," she whispered. "A real miracle." "Jennifer," I started, but she cut me off. "I know you're a skeptic, Dr. Brennan. I know you believe in science, in logic, in rational explanations. But what happened today has no rational explanation, and it's okay not to have one. Sometimes things happen that are beyond our understanding." Before I could answer, my pager went off. It was hospital administration. "Urgent message. Dr. Brennan, report to the Chief Medical Officer's office immediately." Shit. The news had already reached the administration. "I have to go," I told Jennifer and Aaron. "Good luck," Aaron said, and there was genuine sympathy in his eyes. "Whatever happened today, Doctor, I saw it, and I'll testify to it no matter what they say." I walked through the corridors toward the administrative offices. With every step, more people looked at me. Nurses whispering, doctors watching me with curious expressions. The news was spreading, fast. I arrived at the office of Dr. Richard Morrison, our Chief Medical Officer, a pragmatic 62-year-old man who ran the hospital like an efficient corporation. I knocked on the door. "Come in," came the firm voice. I entered. Morrison was behind his desk, reading something on his computer. When he looked up at me, his expression was unreadable. "Michael, sit down." I sat. "I've just received 6 phone calls," Morrison said, lacing his fingers together on the desk. 2 from nurses, 1 from a resident, 3 from patients' families, all about you and a surgery that took place this morning. A surgery where apparently something extraordinary occurred. I waited. I didn't know what to say. "Tell me," Morrison ordered. "Everything, from the beginning. And Michael..." He paused significantly. "Tell me the truth." I told him everything, every detail. Thomas's accident, the severe trauma, the cardiac arrest, the impossibility of the situation. And then, in a voice I barely recognized as my own, I told him about the hand. Morrison listened to me in absolute silence. He didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, he stared at me for long seconds as if evaluating my sanity. "You're telling me," he finally said, his voice carefully controlled, "that you felt a physical presence, a hand, guiding yours during the surgery." "Yes." "And that the patient, who should have been unconscious, claims to have seen everything from above and accurately describes this same presence?" "Yes." "And that 7 independent people report seeing an unexplained light coming from the operating room at the exact time of the surgery?" "Yes, sir." Morrison leaned back in his chair. He ran his hands over his tired face. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, more human. Michael, how many years have you known me? 12? 13? 13 years. And in all that time, you've always been the most rational, most skeptical doctor in this hospital. You argue against homeopathy. You question poorly designed studies. You demand evidence for everything. Morrison paused. So when you, of all people, come to my office and tell me a story like this, I have to take it seriously. I felt an unexpected relief. He believed me. Or at least he wasn't dismissing me as crazy. The problem, Morrison continued, is that this is going to get out. In fact, it's already out. I'm sure by the end of the day, half the hospital will be talking about the ICU miracle. And when the press gets a hold of this, it's going to be a circus, I finished. It will be worse than a circus, Morrison corrected. It will be an avalanche. Reporters, cameras, religious people wanting to declare this an official miracle, skeptics wanting to destroy us. And in the middle of it all, we have a hospital to run and patients to care for. He was right. I knew the news machine. A story like this would be a national headline in a matter of hours. What do you want me to do? I asked. Morrison thought for a moment. Then he picked up the phone. Send Dr. Patterson here, and Dr. Stone, and ask the resident, what's his name? Aaron Mitchell. Aaron Mitchell. And the nurse who was in the room, Jennifer Hayes. Yes, I want them all here in 30 minutes. We're going to hear all sides of this story before we decide how to proceed. The next 30 minutes passed in tense silence. Morrison made a few calls, speaking in a low voice to people I couldn't identify. I stared out the office window, watching the hospital function normally below. People coming and going, ambulances arriving, life and death in its eternal cycle. How much of it was controlled by us? And how much was something else? The team began to arrive. Rebecca came in first, still in surgical clothes, clearly just out of another operation. Then Aaron, nervous, repeatedly adjusting his glasses. Lastly, Jennifer, who had finally gone home to change and come back. Morrison asked each of them to tell their version. Rebecca described the impossible vital signs, how Thomas had come back from an arrest that should have killed him, how every parameter normalized in a way that defied all medical logic. Aaron, in a technical but visibly shaken voice, detailed the statistical probabilities. The survival rate for cases like Thomas's was less than 3%, and of those 3%, the vast majority were left with severe neurological deficits. Thomas had none. When it was Jennifer's turn, the young nurse hesitated. She looked at me, then at Morrison. You can speak freely, Morrison encouraged. No judgments. Jennifer took a deep breath. I was praying, she admitted. During the cardiac arrest, I know I should have been focused on the procedures, but I couldn't just stand there and watch, so I prayed. And I felt a response. A warm, comforting presence filling the room. She looked directly at Morrison. And it wasn't just me, we all felt it. Ask anyone who was in that room. They will all tell you the same thing. Morrison looked at Rebecca. Dr. Stone. Rebecca nodded slowly. I felt it, Richard. I didn't want to believe it. I've spent the last few hours trying to find neurological, psychological explanations, anything, but there are none. What happened in that room was something beyond medicine. Dr. Mitchell. Morrison turned to the resident. Aaron adjusted his glasses again. The young man seemed to be fighting an internal battle. I'm an atheist, Dr. Morrison, he said finally. Or at least I was, but this morning I saw something I cannot explain with science. And if I can't explain it, then I have to admit that there are things beyond my understanding. Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then he got up and went to the window, looking out at the city below. Do you all know what will happen if we make this public? He said without turning around. This hospital will be overrun. Desperate people seeking miracles. Terminally ill patients demanding that Dr. Brennan operate on them. Protests from religious groups wanting to sanctify what happened. Protests from skeptics calling us charlatans. No one answered, because we all knew he was right. Morrison turned around. But you also know what happens if we try to hide it. If it leaks that something extraordinary occurred and we try to cover it up? He shook his head. We'll be accused of a conspiracy, of denying the truth, of putting the hospital's reputation above faith. So what do we do? I asked. Morrison returned to his chair. When he spoke, his voice was resolute. We do what we always do. We tell the truth. The press conference was scheduled for 3 in the afternoon. 6 hours. 6 hours for the entire world to change. Morrison summoned the Public Relations Department. They prepared a careful, neutral statement that simply declared that an extraordinary medical event had occurred and that the responsible team would be making statements. No mention of miracles, no mention of faith, just medical facts. But we all knew the facts wouldn't be enough. I spent those 6 hours in my office trying to process everything. I revisited every moment of the surgery in my mind, the hand, the warmth, the impossible guidance to know there was a hidden bone fragment, a bleeding vessel I hadn't seen. How do I explain this without sounding insane? At 2:45, I put on my best suit. I looked at myself in the mirror. The man staring back at me seemed to have aged a decade in a day, but there was something else in his eyes now, something that wasn't there yesterday. Doubt, awe, fear, hope, all mixed together. The conference room was packed when I arrived. Reporters from local and national newspapers, TV cameras, even some journalists from international outlets who had already picked up the story on social media. Morrison was at the podium. Rebecca, Aaron, and Jennifer were seated in chairs to the side. There was one empty chair for me. Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison began, his voice firm and professional. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Last night, our neurological trauma team performed an emergency surgery on a patient with life-threatening injuries. During the procedure, extraordinary events occurred, events that challenge our conventional medical understanding. The reporters started shouting questions. Morrison raised his hand. Please, let me finish. Dr. Michael Brennan, our chief neurosurgeon, will describe what happened from a medical standpoint. Afterward, other members of the team will make their statements. Then we will open it up for questions. Morrison stepped aside. He looked at me. I nodded and stood up. My legs were steady, but my heart was beating like I was running. I reached the podium. The cameras clicked. Flashes exploded. I took a deep breath. My name is Dr. Michael Brennan, I began. I have been a neurosurgeon for 23 years. In that time, I have performed over 3,000 brain surgeries. I consider myself a man of science, a rational man, a skeptic by nature and training. Pause. The next words would be the hardest I had ever spoken. But last night, during an emergency surgery to remove an epidural hematoma, something happened that I cannot explain with science. The patient, Thomas Garrett, went into cardiac arrest, complete asystole. For 2.5 minutes, his heart did not beat. Without chest compressions, impossible to perform with an open skull. And then, spontaneously, his heart returned. It didn't just return. It completely normalized. The cameras clicked faster. I saw reporters typing furiously on laptops. But that was not the most extraordinary part, I continued, my voice gaining strength. During the surgery, as I worked to control the bleeding, I felt a presence, a hand. Not from my team. Everyone was in their positions. It was a hand I could not see, but I could feel. Warm, gentle, guiding my own hand toward injuries I had not identified, saving that man's life in ways that were beyond my technical ability. Absolute silence. In the room. All the reporters had stopped typing, staring at me with expressions between shock and fascination. I don't know what that presence was, I said, each word weighing a ton. I cannot scientifically prove that it existed, but I know what I felt. And other members of my team felt it too, and the patient, who should have been completely unconscious, describes with exact precision what I experienced. Silence. Then an explosion. Dozens of voices shouting questions at once. Dr. Brennan, are you saying it was a miracle? Do you believe it was God? How will the medical community react to this? Will the patient survive? Morrison stepped up to the microphone. One question at a time, please. You in the front. A reporter stood up. I recognized her, Sarah Chen from the Boston Globe. Dr. Brennan, You have always been known for your scientific approach. Why should we believe this wasn't a hallucination caused by stress or exhaustion? It was the question I was expecting. Because I was not alone, I answered simply. 4 medical professionals, all trained, all skeptical, all experienced the same thing. And the patient describes details he could not possibly know while unconscious and sedated. This goes beyond individual hallucination. And the patient, another reporter shouted. How is he now? Rebecca stood up, approaching the microphone. The patient is exhibiting completely normal neurological function, she said, her voice professional but laden with emotion. No cognitive deficits, no motor deficits, no sequelae. From a medical standpoint, this is... She hesitated, searching for the right word. Impossible, but it is happening. Aaron joined her. I am a neurosurgery resident, the young man said, his voice trembling slightly. I am trained to look for rational explanations, and I have spent the last 12 hours trying to find one. There is none. The numbers do not lie. Mr. Garrett's recovery defies all known medical statistics. Then Jennifer stood up. The young nurse was visibly nervous, but there was determination in her eyes. I prayed, she said simply. During the cardiac arrest, when there was nothing more we could do, I prayed. And my prayer was answered. Not in the way I expected, but it was answered. The story exploded. Within 24 hours, it was on every national news network. In 48, it was international. The Boston Miracle, they called it. The hand of God in the operating room. Skeptic doctor witnesses the impossible. The hospital was inundated. Not with curiosity seekers, as Morrison had predicted, but with desperate people. Mothers bringing sick children, the elderly in wheelchairs, people in the terminal stages of cancer, holding letters begging me to operate on them, pray for them, touch them. It broke my heart to have to say no, to have to explain that I had no control over what happened, that it wasn't me who had performed the miracle, that I was just an instrument. Thomas Garrett was discharged from the hospital 5 days after the surgery. 5 days. For a trauma that should have kept him hospitalized for weeks, if he had survived at all. On the day of his discharge, he asked to speak with me. We went to the hospital chapel, a small quiet space with stained glass windows that painted the floor with soft light. I wanted to thank you, Thomas said, holding his wife Sarah's hand. Their little daughter was in his arms playing with a teddy bear. Not just for saving my life, but for having the courage to tell the truth. Many doctors would have hidden this, would have called it luck, coincidence, anything but what it really was. And what was it? I asked, because I still wasn't sure what to call it. Thomas smiled. Grace, he said simply. Grace in its purest form. A reminder that there are things greater than us, greater than medicine, greater than science, and that sometimes when we least expect it, those things touch our lives. I was silent. I had no words. I came back for a reason, Thomas continued. My daughter, my wife, the students I still need to teach, the stories I still need to tell, and you, Dr. Brennan, were the instrument chosen to bring me back. Not for your technical skill, though you are brilliant, but because you were willing to see, willing to feel, willing to trust. He held out his hand. I shook it. And for a second, just a second, I felt it again. That warmth, that presence. Then it was gone. Thomas smiled as if he had felt it too. He is still with you, the man said, and always will be. When you need it. When your patients need it. When any of us need it. We just have to be willing to feel. They left. A whole family, walking into the life they had almost lost. And I stood there in the empty chapel, looking at the light filtering through the stained glass. The following weeks were chaotic. Interviews, medical journal articles questioning every detail. Some colleagues supported me. Others treated me as if I had gone insane. I lost some friendships. I gained others. But the most important thing happened 6 weeks later. I was operating again. An 8-year-old child with a brain tumor. The surgery was complex, risky. It was at the very limit of my abilities. And at the critical moment when I had to decide between 2 approaches, both dangerous, I felt it again. The hand, not as strong as the first time, more subtle, more gentle. but it was there, guiding me, showing me the way. The surgery was a success. The child woke up with no deficits, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that this had not been the last time. That whenever I needed it, whenever my patients needed it, that presence would be there, invisible, silent, but real. Today, a year later, I still operate. I'm still skeptical about many things. I still trust in science, in training, in technique. But now I know there is something more, something that medicine cannot fully explain, something that is beyond our protocols and textbooks. Call it faith. Call it a miracle. Call it divine grace. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that it exists, and that it changed not only Thomas Garrett's life but mine as well. Jennifer still works with me. She still prays before difficult surgeries, and I don't stop her. Aaron has become an extraordinary surgeon, more humble, more open to possibilities. Rebecca remains the best anesthesiologist I know, but now there is a softness to her that wasn't there before. We were all touched. We were all transformed. And if you are reading this, if you are hearing this story, maybe it's because you also need to know that there is hope beyond logic, that there is healing beyond medicine, that there is an invisible hand ready to guide any of us, doctors, nurses, patients, everyone, when we are willing to feel. You just have to be open, be present, be willing to believe in the impossible, because the impossible happens every day. I know, I felt it, and I will never be the same again. If this story touched your heart, leave your comment sharing what you felt. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that medicine can't explain. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, that